Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for coming up to Daily Cyber. This is episode 280. Wow, it's been a long journey to get up to 280, but it's been exciting. A lot of information, a lot of great people we've been meeting and interviewing. So it's really exciting to go through Daily Cyber and learn so much from experts. And today I'm going to have a great expert that I've been talking to offline, as well as just kind of connecting on just different areas of cybersecurity. So today I'm going to have Joshua Scott on. He has spent nearly 3 decades in the trenches of security and technology, helping companies turn complex risks into clear business advantages. As a VP of security of Hydrolix, and I want to make sure I pronounce that correctly, I'll ask him after. He's responsible for protecting the platform that ingests data at mind-bending scales, terabytes to petabytes, and delivering answers in seconds. His mission is simple: make security a value driver, not a roadblock. And I think that's something that all of us kind of run into the challenge of how to do that. How can we make it a success for the company and organization? It's good to have that conversation with him today. Joshua has built and led security programs that cover everything from data privacy, cloud security, to threat detection, incident response, compliance frameworks like SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA. He thrives at the intersection of business goals and security demands, translating technical jargon into trust for executives, customers, and teams alike. So he has a long more in his bio, which is great, and we'll get really into that today. So grab a coffee, grab a tea, and let's hack at it. Hey, Joshua, how's it going?
Hey, not bad, Brandon. How are you?
Pretty good. Oh, man, your bio is long, extensive. And I mean, you've got years in the trenches, so I completely understand.
Yeah. I love what I do. 30 years now that I've been doing it. So started right out of high school and just found my calling. And this is what I've been doing now for 30 years.
So tell me a little bit about the journey, because we have people that come to Daily Cyber and the community. How did you get started? How did you break into the industry?
So when I started in tech, I was building clone computers for $8 an hour and started off basically doing that. Right. And then I really enjoyed tech. I had no background, no experience with it. I played with a friend's computer at his house because we didn't have a computer at home.
Right.
And then from there, I realized how much I enjoyed, the technical aspect of it and the tinkering side of it. The first book I ever read was the MS-DOS Bible. And I remember reading that cover to cover and learning how to do command line items. And then, after a couple years of doing just kind of help desk, sysadmin, network type stuff, I realized I didn't know what aspect of tech I liked the most. And then I was talking with somebody that was in security, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we touch everything. We get involved with everything." And that's kind of how I started in security. It was probably like 1997. Started administering firewalls and started, running, tools like CyberCop scanner way back in the day, from Network Associates. So it was really interesting because I got to play with more tech. And for me at that time, I was still just, an engineer, architect doing most of the technical work. And it was fun.
Right.
I mean, it's still fun. I still love it today.
Yeah, let's put that out there.
Yeah.
I kind of teetered off. I'm waiting for my retirement, like a government employee. I'm counting the days. I got to, count it down on the calendar. Now, how has it changed from, like you said, in the late 90s to now? Like, how has security evolved?
It's evolved a lot because of the technology itself, right? So, we're always reactive to whatever the industry is using and whatever is, kind of the latest buzz about. But the threats from a security standpoint are still pretty much the same. And we still aren't handling, some of the basics, hygiene, patching, those kind of things. Those are problems 30 years ago, and they're still problems today.
Right.
And, so not much has changed from that aspect. Things have gotten a lot more technical.
Right.
There's a lot more, adversaries out there, and there's a lot more potential for, for some kind of damage or harm to a business with tech. And that's what we're seeing. So it's become more complex, but it's still the same fundamental issues.
Fundamental, but I think my opinion is the landscape's changed.
Yeah.
Like before, an example, like you're talking about, like, 90s. I remember working at the Sky Dome, and we were getting for I can't remember what it's called. I just ran a blank. But when Y2K, I was getting ready for Y2K. I was working physical security, and oh my God, all the systems were going to shut up. But when I look till then, we had the control center, we had office computers, we had a few servers, and that was it. Like
Yeah.
that was really all you're worried about. You weren't worried about Wi-Fi and this and that, like all these other things. You were worried about, can the control center keep up? Can the CCTV cameras keep up? Can the servers do the backups? Can all that? And it was a lot different landscape than I'm talking to people now, where they're on-prem, off-prem, hybrid, cloud, all this. And it's like the landscape to me has completely changed.
Yeah, I mean, the technology landscape and everything that's being used from a business standpoint has absolutely changed. And that definitely makes it harder because there's a lot more assets now. There's a lot more systems and things to consider from a security standpoint. But at the core of it, it's still the same fundamental problems that we're facing, that we're facing. It's basically things, are we managing identities properly? Are we, ensuring that systems are patched and addressed? Are we ensuring we get the right log files from those systems? All of that. Those problems still exist, but there's just a lot more of those types of systems that we actually have to evaluate. And that's probably the biggest challenge.
And I think that was one of the questions I had for you, was like, why has the amount of security exploded? I think we're starting to kind of dabble into that, like the landscape, the attack vector, like the solutions, technology. You and I were talking before about pictures and AI and how it's changing. Like, I think, from my opinion, I'd love to get yours, is the landscape's changing. What do you think? Like, why is security exploding?
I mean, the number of systems that we use on a daily basis has exploded, just from, if you look at the general consumer now, consumers using ChatGPT, they're using these kind of things. Tech is part of everybody's life now. So, and security is a big part of making sure that, tech is adopted well and run well and protected well. So that's one of the big reasons, right? You also look at things like cloud. I mean, before, when we were in a data center, it was much easier to protect. It still wasn't easy, but it was easier because at least you knew where everything was. But now in the SaaS era, in the cloud era, you don't know where your assets live. They could live across a variety of, places. Like we run in, 4 or 5 different clouds. So we've got assets all over the world, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Most businesses are now doing that. So the number of just raw systems you may have, and the number of providers that are giving you some type of service, an HR provider, a finance provider, with these SaaS platforms, we've got so many of them. I remember years ago when I was at Realtor.com, we were doing an assessment when kind of the CASB market first came out, and they're identifying all the different kind of cloud providers you had.
Mm-hmm.
It came back with this, we thought, we're like, we already have a data center. We're not running that much. And it came back with like 2,000 different cloud solutions that we were actually using. And it's like, oh my God, we got 2,000 of these things. That's crazy.
Right.
So that right there was mind blowing. It's like, all right, oh my God, we've got way more things to be worried about than we initially thought.
Right.
Now it's still the same basic things that we got to worry about for each one, but there's, 2,000 of them that we now have to worry about. So the threat vectors and the potential for leakage and the potential for an issue in one of those platforms, it's amplified.
I also think, and I mean, I'd love to get your opinion on this. I think the control of the security has changed and pivoted to more a shared model versus individually. Like you said, like before it was our server, it was our network, it was that. You had a data center, it was shared, but you at least had it isolated, that was your rack, no one had access to it, and that was it. But hold on, now you're talking like you've got SaaS solutions like Workday and Salesforce and all that have but then you have platforms and service, infrastructure as service, and you're all over the place. And then you have third parties that potentially could be helping you. So now that landscape is changed and expanded to, and I know you probably go through this, and a lot of people, is third party due diligence. You now have to go through and make sure they're secure, because downstream liability, if they get compromised, you potentially get compromised because you have some sort of connection, either infrastructure, IT, VPN, whatever that may be. You're connected in some way. If they get compromised, you're going to get compromised.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, there's a lot of connections between all these different vendors and where your data lives and where your systems live, and depending on the models you're choosing, whether it's SaaS, true SaaS, or infrastructure as a service. Now, the shared responsibility model is great. That was one of the things I really liked, and that's why I was an early adopter of the cloud, because it makes sense. We don't have enough staff basically to do all the things we need to do from a security standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a data center, we were always backed up with just the amount of things we need to do. So it's nice to be able to offload some of that, like some of the core fundamental system patching type items and maybe some of the network type restrictions. But there's still, again, it's shared responsibility. There's still all those things that we have to do. Mm-hmm. And it just makes it more complex, because it's great that they're handling patching. It's great that they're handling the things, within their layers. but there's still so much that you have to do, as a company, as a business, for your aspects of it, that, the responsibility that falls on us. We have to make sure that we're adding users correctly. We have to make sure that we're adopting the security solutions or capabilities that the platform has. And, a lot of times people aren't doing that because it's so easy to it's kind of like back in the day with Microsoft, click, next, and you've got a running server. And for a lot of SaaS platforms, it's that same thing. Oh, let me sign up for a trial and I've got this account that it can do all these kind of things, but there's no security, native. I mean, it might be native, but it's something that you have to explicitly turn on or account for. I think that's the other challenge we have, is that it's great that they're handling the core infrastructure items and the servers and the patching, but we're not thinking about all the other stuff. And it's that much easier now for any user to go sign up for these things too.
Right.
So that's the other challenge, is that now any individual user, back in the day when we were at a data center, it was easy enough to say, okay, well, we've got to stand up a server for installing a new software package. IT was involved, security might have gotten involved. There were more people involved, but now, the legal team wants to review a contract management solution. They'll just go out there and review it and start running with a trial and start putting documents in it. And security may not even know about it.
Right.
I think it's just the explosion of shadow IT is one of the big challenges that we face. And that's why, security data has exploded. The explosion of just the number of vendors or SaaS providers or infrastructure as service providers that you may use, that's exploded as well. That's what makes it complicated. There's just so many different vendors and systems that we're using, and then they're all interconnected too, as we saw with recent outages. There's dependencies across each of them. So any individual issue, somebody goes down, somebody has a breach, it could affect 100 different providers that are running on top of them.
So when you're going through this, and again, because your expertise and background, you're talking about like shared responsibility. Is there another layer to that? And I'm going to need context, because I know you have Azure, you have Microsoft Azure, you have Google, you have all these different platforms. But is there another layer to that on shared responsibility, like an outside vendor, an MSSP, like something on that you're layering on top of that? Now you have to do an extra layer of due diligence.
I mean, yeah, you want to make sure that the vendor that you're actually onboarding, number one, that they have the right security controls. Do they actually, take security seriously? So your TPRM programs are really, really important. But then you also have to factor in, what are they relying on? Are they relying on somebody, or some other vendor or some downstream service that, may have some weaknesses as well? I mean, like the explosion of AI, that was one of the things I remember at previous companies is, we were looking at, oh, well, here's a vendor and they're using this particular AI model, or they're using this particular AI capability. Well, we know our data is leaving their premise. So we need to have an understanding of like who they're using and how they're, protecting those workflows. Again, it still falls on the individual vendors, but yeah, there is an extra layer of ensuring you understand, the fourth party risks that come along with it. And then those fourth parties also have connectivity to other services. So it's a long chain of different types of things that rely on each other and have risk.
And I think that's why I wanted to bring that from people that are watching this that might be breaking into security, because sometimes you think, oh, it's just that vendor. Like you said, you had 2,000 cloud solutions. It's just that 5 that we work with. It's just that short list. And I remember working with GoSecure, and we were doing some scans for a client. And one of the tools that we were able to use was be able to see all the developers in the code and seeing how many layers deep that code went and outsourced to different parties. Ended up, it was 4th, 5th, 6th party. Some people in Russia, it was the Philippines, it was code from all over. But the company was like, hold on, we're working with this developer who's US based, and that's what we're supposed to know. But hold on, why is there code in Russia? Why is there code in someone here? And we're like, well, potentially they're outsourcing that section of the development, or they're scraping that code and using it for their reasons. Who knows? But you need to know. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe that. And I think I bring that up for the security people that are watching that. You're an investigator. You have to go as deep as you go. Where does the rabbit hole take you, right? Where the connections go, and you just keep going until you get an answer. And we always learn is trust but verify, right? You keep going through until you got to go, okay, that's it. And if they don't meet the due diligence, and this is why security is always told us, I was always looked at as the no people. Doesn't meet our due diligence. No, it's not happening. I remember working with a client, and they're like, oh, but the executives want this. I'm sorry. I understand it's a great solution, but at this time, they don't meet our compliance. Like, they don't meet our security controls. Our maturity is here and they're not there. So if they don't meet that, then, we can't bring on board them and start putting our data, using our solution, having our employees use it. I'm sorry. And they're like, but is there a way we can get around it? Shadow IT. I'm like, no, there's no way around this. You do it. We break compliance and security and they get compromised. We're accountable.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, we'll see if we can find something else. I said, I'll review it. I'll analyze it and give you guys a report, but I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to fluff it because a CISO or an executive or a VP wants it because they like it. Right. It doesn't work for the organization.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because it's okay to, and then again, people watching this, it's okay to say no politically. Don't come off rude. Don't come off as jerk or arrogant, but this is the reason. And your goal to be there is to protect the organization, right? From risk and liability. And if you do that, have data points. Because of this, they don't meet that. They haven't had a pen test. Their vulnerabilities are 2 years old. There's like 5 criticals that started in 2003. They still haven't remediated that. They're not doing well. They're not using two-factor authentication, whatever that laundry list is. It's just they're not there. Here's our requirements where we have our baseline. They're not. They didn't pass. They didn't pass. They didn't pass. That's all it is, right? They need to hit a certain level.
I mean, it's so common though. I mean, the problem is because if we put too many gates from a security standpoint, we make it that difficult to actually onboard a vendor. So I'm all for saying no when it makes sense. And, we've gone through the assessment and we've done that, but we've also got to make it easy to either get to a no or get to an alternative solution. So if we say no, we should say, you can't do this because of this, this, and this. But if the vendor does X, Y, and Z, we can onboard them in a limited capacity. Because if we put too many roadblocks, that's why shadow IT happens.
Oh,
right?
100%.
Users will end up going down the path anyways, and they're going to end up using it, and we're not going to have visibility, which is actually just as bad as them using that particular vendor, because we don't even know that they're using the vulnerable vendor. So I'd much rather know that we're using a vulnerable vendor and at least have some mitigations in place versus somebody going out and actually just using it. So I think we've got some work to do from a TPRM standpoint to make that process a little bit smoother, so that we can actually quickly get to either a no that makes sense. And you also need backing and support from your executive teams, and make sure that, hey, when we do say no, we've adopted this as a company framework. This is when we do say no, here's why. And here's what you need to investigate, otherwise. Or in the case where, because everything should be based on risk, if there is a risk to the business, let's make sure we identify that, and let's make sure we have somebody that is willing to, that basically the stakeholder should be signing off on it, saying, look, hey, we really need this tool. This tool, or this solution actually helps the business. Let's understand what the risks are. And then it's not just risk from a cyber standpoint. We've got to consider what the risks are from a business standpoint too. So, maybe this puts us into new markets. Maybe this actually gives us, additional competitive advantage. If we're not thinking about those types of items and we're only looking at it from a security standpoint, saying no, then that's how we get into, the shadow IT thing. It's like, oh no, security is not really helping the business. I think at times, over the years, what I've seen too is security often forgets like why we're here. Right. We're here for the business. We're here to support the business. We're not here to make sure that everything's 100% secure, because there is no such thing as 100% security. We're here to support the business. So we've got to do that in a pragmatic way.
Right. And I think there's a balance to that, because I worked at IR, and I think you did instant response too. Like, the challenge is when you go over again and again and again as an instant response engagement lead, and you kind of hear it go over and over again, you kind of get tainted in the sense of, okay, I want to have a certain level of maturity. Like, there's a certain level that they have to meet. Now, like you said, I totally agree. There's areas where there's a gray areas where you can have an area where you isolate the application. You kind of have, least privileges or control access or things like that. You have policies around it where you limit amount of data at this point in time, right? But those things I agree with. But also, and for companies that are hearing this, you got to be careful pushing that line, because if they get breached, they get compromised, now you're in an incident, now you're going through an incident, now you have to justify to counsel, carrier, and all that. Why'd you make that decision when they weren't at a certain level? So it's a balancing act, and I think it's a business decision. If you're going to accept the risk, you got to understand what risk you're accepting.
Yeah. That's a key point. It's a business decision, and if you do accept it, you got to understand why you're accepting it, and make sure that the right people are signing off on it as well.
Yeah.
But it definitely is. We've got to find that right balance, making sure that we can, it's defensible. But the other thing to consider too is even the vendors that do pass security and have all the right requirements and pass your vendor assessment, they can still have a breach. So that issue exists, because we've seen that plenty of times of vendors that that have a good security posture and they're doing everything right, they still get compromised.
Right.
So nobody's immune from it.
No.
It's just how do we actually put the right controls in place, and how do we know? For me, I think knowing about what we have is probably the most important thing, because then we can start identifying what are the most critical assets, what are the most critical pieces of what we actually have, so then we can focus our controls on that.
Right.
For some of the stuff that's not as important, it's like, okay, yes, we accept the risk. We know that there could be a breach, but at least we're not, we've mitigated enough by we're not putting any sensitive data in there, or we're limiting the number of people that are in there. So, at least the damage to the company isn't as extreme.
Now, if you have a customer, do you rank them in a certain way, or let's say a partner, do you rank them in a certain way that if they're higher risk in the sense of more sensitive data, more access to your environment, do you do more work with them on security and tabletop exercise and get them to really engage, versus say there's an outside partner, vendor, and I'm using example, say it's like a marketing company, like if they have some access to marketing material and it's low risk, they got your ISO files, they got some image files, they got some videos, but if they ever got compromised, you just kind of you recreate it, you send it back over, Bob's your uncle. But the other one is like they've got the keys of the kingdom, they're administrating. Do you treat them differently? Do you
Oh yeah,
work with
definitely.
them? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, whenever you're dealing with anybody that's got more privileged access, whether it's a vendor, a customer, something like that, you've got to have extra controls on those, because a breach of that could be extremely damaging to the company. But in general, though, I mean, the way I look at any kind of customer arrangement or anything that we're dealing with, I mean, I want them all to have that high bar of security. I don't want one customer to have a better security posture or have more attention than any others. Because generally, I anything that a customer gives us, any data they give us, any data that any service that we're providing for them, they should all have that same level of security, the same expectation of security.
Yeah, no, but my question is, do you engage them more in the ecosystem of your security, i.e., do you kind of get them engaged your tabletop access? Do you talk to them about the incident response plan and the disaster recovery, at least how it relates to them, going through kind of a mock call with them to say, okay, like what's your SLA? Let's kind of walk through that. Do you do that more with them than you would say like I said, that lower tier partner?
I mean, from a partner standpoint, yeah, you would do that with some of the more, critical ones, but depending on who's the critical one, like an AWS, for example, if you're running in a, major cloud provider, they're not going to give you much time unless, you're a really huge client, but you've got to have a certain level of trust that they're doing what they need to be doing,
Right.
and that you've also mitigated things on your end. So it really depends on the partners that you're providing, but if you've got a small, marketing type firm that's got access to a ton of data, or a small, whatever type of, firm, or vendor that has access to certain types of data, yeah, you provide what's needed to be able to accomplish that, and you ensure that you're monitoring those particular things. So that's when I talk about like mitigating controls. If there is a vendor that poses a huge risk to us, or some kind of monumental risk, we want to try to limit that as much as possible. How do we either restrict the number of people that have access, restrict the data that they have access to, or at least increase the amount of monitoring we have on it, so that when something does happen, at least we can get some early signals.
Right, for sure. Totally makes sense. Now, another question I have for you is, as we're seeing the security kind of posture change, like why are we seeing the massive increase? Like, why is everything starting to just expand? Like there's so much need for security right now.
I mean, I think it goes back to just, as I said, when we did the cloud assessment, we saw 2,000 vendors, and this is probably 20 years ago. It's the same thing now. There's even more vendors out there. There's even more technologies. You look at the explosion of just AI and all the different companies and things, and consumer tools that are being used, company tools that are being used, that are that everybody has. So there's been just an explosion of the amount of tech that everybody's using. There's individual apps for every single thing that you're doing across the board. Right. And you hear about all these different announcements from, Anthropic and OpenAI and whomever else, right? There's new stuff coming out all the time. And AI, you've seen it even faster. I mean, I've seen the .com era. I've seen, Web 2, 1.0, 2.0, all those kind of things. And, what I've been seeing with the AI side is it's moving at way faster pace than any of those other, ones even combined, right? They moved fast, but we're seeing entire like markets, and topical areas of AI appear and disappear within like a 3 to 6 month cycle, which is just kind of help, it's contributing to that massive increase in just the amount of things that need to be protected, because there's just an explosion of tech. Right. So it's nice to see the tech. I mean, at my core, I'm still a techie, and I love seeing, the new things out there. But then on the flip side, it's like, all right, wow, there's a lot of things that we need to be worried about.
Okay. As a security professional, so what are you doing to remediate that, to get a grasp on that?
That's a tough one. I mean, part of it is, ensuring that your employees understand what they're using. Let's make sure that we raise awareness of the types of tools are out there, and make sure that they're keeping you up to date. Becoming a partner to the organization is really, really important, so that they feel comfortable telling you. It can't be us saying, "Oh, you must tell us," and we're going to deny things. It's got to be we're here to help the business. So I think a lot of it is the messaging that that we share with the company. Hey, we're here to help. We don't want to be a roadblock. We want to make sure we're doing what's right to for the business and protect the business where possible. So, keep us in the loop. Let us know about these types of things. Find those advocates or those, whatever you want to call them, champions, various folks within the org that actually will be your ears and, your boots on the ground to a certain extent, and they can help you keep things up to date. And then from there, it's also just continual discovery. We always have to be in discovery mode, because every day there's something new we learn. There's something else we didn't know about. There's some other aspect of, hey, the team is using some new tool. Oh, it's got this kind of data in it. Oh, wow, we didn't know about that. So we've got to be able to, simplify that, because then we can start taking decisions on, now that we have an understanding of what our estate looks like, how do we start putting the right controls in place? Or, we do an assessment, say, oh yeah, you know what, we're not too worried about the data in that particular platform. So we'll push it to the side, because there's always 100 things to do in security. We're staffed to do like 10, right? Just, as an example. Right. So we can't do everything. We've got to find a way to, prioritize and focus on the things that matter the most to the business. But without knowing everything that's out there, we have no way to really know if it is something that matters to the business.
And what's a good way? Because again, people are going to be watching this. Like, what's a good way for them to know? Like, again, not knowing, it's such an open, topic. It's like, what do you mean I don't know? Like, shouldn't I know? How do I know? Who do I ask? Who do I call? Do I call a friend? Do I call a colleague? Like, how am I supposed to know what's in my environment?
I think there's a couple different ways of doing it, and I don't know that there's a defined approach that works 100% of the time, because it depends on your business. Right. But I would say one thing that I've always done is relationship building. Right? You got to know the heads of each of the different areas. You've got to have conversations with them. And you've got to understand what they're using and what becomes part of their operating model for their particular department, right? When you have an understanding of that at least gives you some insight into what they're using, why they're using it, what the criticality of it, what keeps them up at night. Mm-hmm. So that's one aspect of it, is just from a people standpoint. The other thing is through awareness campaigns, making sure that employees feel comfortable sharing that information. And then you've got some of the technical measures. How do I have the right endpoint management or endpoint, discovery tools, and, CASB or whatever, whatever the current thing is, something that's out there discovering the types of solutions that could help me see what's out there. So you want, inventory, you want some way for employees to, share this information without worrying about it. And then you want those relationships where people can tell you about, this is what we need, and this is why we're using these things.
Mm-hmm. So kind of recap, so someone watches you. 1 is 2 is building a relationship and rapport and networking, right? Make sure that you're a friend to the business and a friend to your colleagues and your shareholders and your stakeholders, so they will collaborate with you. 2, what I heard was have some sort of way of inventory and discovery, asset inventory, software, hardware inventory, endpoint protection. A lot of times you'll see, as you go through software information on the actual consoles. So you get to see if anything's flagging or not flagging through the console. So you can actually say like, hey, Microsoft, this, hold on, what's this AI tool? I've never seen that before. And then at least you can do that, and you can do the inventory that way. Looking at, your proxy filters and things like that, your mail filters along that line, because what happens, you can start to see things that are filtering through and coming in and out. So you might flag some things that don't look normal to the environment, or just new. Like all of a sudden in November, I'm seeing a lot more activity requests on, and I'll use an example. Say we didn't adopt ChatGPT, but now November, someone came in and said, hey, I've been using ChatGPT to do X. And also now we see like OpenAI and a spike of all traffic going to the site. Okay, now we get to see that, right? So we get to do that by our analysis, and then we get to see, okay, who's going to that, what IP addresses, or, can we track that down to a location? Maybe there's a department, maybe HR now did a ChatGPT seminar, and now it's, everyone's doing ChatGPT in HR, right? So things like that, I think, will give you a holistic view to come and assess that, is this something security needs to dive into and start to, hone down control? Or is it something you said, like, is there an education process here that, what are you guys doing? How are you using it? How can we help you guys? And then is like, do we wrap some sort of controls and security around it? And again, policies, technical controls.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. It's all those items, right? And I think
Yeah.
the big thing about inventory is there's no inventory to me is visibility. That's one of the
Mhm.
things. Like I understand what's out there and I know what it's being used for, or I at least know what's on it. But that there's a lot of things involved in it. And I think you hit a perfect example is what's in the proxy logs or what are the users visiting from a web browser standpoint? Because most of the apps that we're using nowadays too aren't on the the end user systems. They're somewhere in the cloud.
Right.
That's the whole SaaS model. So we don't necessarily know what's out there. So we've got to find a way to actually discover that and be able to inventory it and see, where people are logging into. So it's not just, asset data on an endpoint. It's also proxy logs. It's also things from your cloud providers. It's also things from your identity provider, which will show where your, identities are actually being used. So it's all of those collectively actually will give you kind of a sense of, what your environment looks like and how it's being used.
Right.
But even then, is that enough? Who knows? It really depends on your business and how comfortable you are knowing what's out there. And then the relationships are also important too, because you may find too, I think there's a, the benefit of knowing that information is that you can actually help the business as well. Are we using two tools that actually are doing the same thing that are costing us, we're paying twice, we're actually using two different competing tools. It's like, hey, let's standardize things. Let's make things better.
Right.
Standardizing on tools actually has a benefit from just the, employee experience. So there's a lot of kind of crossover between that. We want that information. Inventory is important for everybody. Within tech.
To your point, like standardizing the desktop, the applications keeps it seamless so you can do training. You can make sure that people can actually do their job and they're efficient. If there's gaps in the process, they can figure that out because it's like, hey, Joan's doing this way, Fred's doing that way. It's taking 45 minutes of Jonah, but Fred's only taking 15. Maybe they need to job shadowing because Fred has a better way of doing it.
Yep.
Right now, you look at efficiency versus someone's using one, someone's using a different one. Fred doesn't know Jones doesn't know Fred. And it's like, I don't know what they're doing. Like, I have no clue. I've got my process down. So I think that's
and then they can't collaborate between the two because they're using different tools. They may be speaking different languages. So standardizing helps you from an IT support standpoint, from a cost standpoint, and from a security standpoint, because then that one particular tool. When we've got three different tools doing the same thing, and now we've got three different attack surfaces that we've got to worry about from a security standpoint. And then, maybe we've got the premium version of this one particular vendor that has the security capabilities we need, but we're using the cheaper version on these other two vendors. It's like, okay, we're actually lessening our security posture by running these other two. Right. That's the other reason why we want to standardize. There's a lot of value, with standardizing. And I get it. There's no, there's an exception to every rule, right? So there's going to be legitimate reasons why we need a particular other vendor, right? They do something that we just can't do with this vendor. And then, you make a risk decision. You understand, look, this is what we need, and this is the value we get from it. So we'll put, the requiring controls on it to make sure it actually is protected right.
Yeah. And I think that to your point, as long as, and this is what I found for myself, is when you're doing an evaluation, like even when it's asset inventory, you're going through software inventory, mostly on the software, you see duplicate software that's only utilized 20% here, 2% here, 5% here. And you kind of look through and you do an evaluation. It's like, that software one does all that. And they're like, I didn't know that. I just knew this one and I used it once or twice. I'm really comfortable with it. It does it. And then you can look at licensing, cost, support, and all that. If you go down to one solution, you might have a better buying power. And I know is that 300, 500, 1,000 clients or endpoints that you're installing on it, all of a sudden you get better pricing. So instead of having it 200 of it here, 300 over here, then you're like, we're spending more on licensing software when we can be more cost effective and won't use one solution. Now, I do agree with you. If that one solution doesn't have the function and ability to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that is, bringing another solution to help and balance it out, totally agree with it. But if you have three solutions that do the same thing, why are we using three solutions?
Yeah. It's just costing you more. You get the economies of scale if everybody's using the same platform, to your point. So, and it's easier from an organizational standpoint. You can now focus training and other material on the solution that everybody's using. And, it makes it easier for the IT team because it's just overall, it's generally better. Right. But again, there's exceptions to every rule.
100%. So kind of going through this, and one of the questions that came up for me was, okay, you kind of go through this, you understand an explosion, you understand a little bit. What are the headaches that like someone like yourself as a VP are dealing with? And how are you dealing with the day-to-day kind of stressors of everything going on?
I mean, number one, it's just the explosion of the amount of systems that are being used, right? Every day there's a new type of system that employees might be using, that employees might be taking advantage of. And maybe, they're legitimate reasons for using it. But again, without that visibility, that you don't know. So that's one of the headaches, is just not the unknowns. Then on top of that, the kind of current way that a lot of SaaS providers do it is the security features are actually an upsell a lot of times, right? So that creates challenges too. It's like, all right, how do we actually put in some of the right controls on this when we know we've got limited capabilities? And how are we going to accept some of those risks? How are we going to get the necessary data out of those platforms? That's another big challenge. Is we've got something critical. Is it actually sending us the right telemetry to understand when people are doing things, or do we have to kind of put a band-aid around it? So just the complexity in every single system is somewhat unique, right? Every single cloud provider is different. Every single SaaS provider, whether you're using an HR platform, 2 different HR platforms, they might work completely different, have different sets of controls. So all of that makes headaches for the security teams, because now it's not like we're managing, or providing, security risks data on one platform or one, department. We have to provide it across 25 different platforms that might have, different ways of securing things and different controls in place, and different SLAs, and, a number of different things. So that definitely creates a lot of headache. And then not knowing when employees are actually adding a new one, or if they're evaluating something new and bringing in an entirely new vendor, all of that just adds to the headache, because there's just, again, it goes, 100 things to do in security. We're staffed to do 10. How do we choose those 10 without knowing what's out there? And I think the biggest thing is we've got to find a way to prioritize better, because at the end of the day, that's probably one of the most important things in security, is learning how to focus on the things that matter most to the business. And that's something that, initially, I remember when I first started, it's like, oh, I'm a security person. Let's just, protect everything. I see an issue, let's protect it. And I remember running into a lot of, friction with people, with, employees, with staff on that. And when I started really thinking through it and talking, this is before I really understood, this is probably 20 years back. It's really difficult to, when you have that kind of approach, is most of the folks that you're interfacing with are like, hey, wait, this is not important, right? This is a development system, or this is something we're just testing around with. Why do we have to go through all this headache to actually get this set up and get it stood up, or even just to do a trial of this particular thing? Right? So we put in a lot of, I think that's something that security needs to, continue to focus on, is how do we make it easier for our employees to use the things they need to do with in a managed way, right? In a way that, manages the risk effectively, so that we don't continue to have this, the headaches and the explosion of new systems without knowing about it, right? And again, it comes back to relationships, understanding what's out there, and then finding ways to, allow maybe some risk into the environment in a controlled way. Right. How do you put in a system? Maybe you have different tiers of access, and you have an outer layer, which is for all your vendors that are, untrusted, and then kind of the inner layer for the things that you really trust and you really care about. And that at least gives you a way to, not always say no to employees or no to departments. It's like, hey, we can say yes, but here's how you can do it. You can't access this data, or you have to log in through this other system, whatever it happens to be. Or, you put certain control. Hey, we can bring in this system as long as they support, MFA and SSO, and, they provide us logs. We've got to find a way to actually be able to support those kind of things, because that will help with the headache as well. Because if we work with the teams, we get more visibility. If we work with the teams, they'll provide us more information, right? But even then, right? So let's just say, in a perfect world, if you get all that, you still got potentially, hundreds, thousands of systems that you're now having to do risk management on, do TP, vendor assessments on, and then you have to also, once they're implemented, what are you doing with that system? Am I taking logs from it to feed into my SIM or into my data platform? How am I analyzing that? Do I understand the data that's coming from that system? So there's just, the headaches are, hundreds, thousands of systems that are all unique and have different capabilities. And, having an understanding of that is complicated.
So you mentioned this, and I've heard you mention it a couple of times. How do you now evaluate and prioritize your projects and what you're doing when it comes to security?
I mean, number one is understanding what's important to the business, right? Where are we going from a, just a directional standpoint? What are the things that matter the most? And then having the relationship with each of the other, execs, and making sure, what keeps them up at night? What are the things that worry them the most? What are the things that could actually cause significant harm to the business? And then you want, from there, you work backwards and say, let's understand these particular assets. Let's understand what are the things that could, cause some kind of harm that will be hard to recover from. And then let's focus our security efforts on those. We've got to protect the things that matter most to the business, where, if a, marketing system that, publishes, even you have a marketing website, if it's compromised, yeah, that's bad, but you can generally recover from that. But if you lose customer data, you damage trust, right? So we want to
Right.
make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that we're keeping that trust with our customers, and that we're protecting and doing everything we can to to protect customer environments, because to me that's always got to be the number one thing is customers signing on to use your particular product.
Mhm.
We have to make sure that we understand that, number one, this is not our data. They're entrusting their data to us. We've got to protect it. So
Right.
that's understanding kind of how that works, right? And it depends on the company. I've worked at companies where we didn't have customers necessarily giving us data, so then we found the other things that matter to the business.
Right. So one of the things that I've done through my evaluation is kind of look at the snapshot of the project. So you kind of list them all out, and then I look at criticality and potential of compromise. Right. The higher the risk, the higher the potential compromise, the higher it goes up into my top 10. In that top 10, I'm hoping I don't have 10 full critical, high urgent risk, that I need to deal with, but probably the top 3, maybe 5. Then on top of what you're saying is then there's the business requests,
Yep.
new solutions, new technology, innovation, things they would want us to take a look at. So I try to round that out and start with that. Now it's a dynamic list. Some are going to come off the list. Some are going to pivot and change. Business is going to bring in new. But I try to keep that top 10 list going, and then being able to go through that now as critical things come up. A vulnerability test, a penetration test, a partner comes up, 0 days come through the industry, whatever that may be, they'll go into my top 10. Everything else is ongoing projects that are scheduled for the quarter or longer, depending on the solution or deployment, what we're doing. But generally try to keep that top 10 list going, because at least I can be accountable to that top 10 list and moving that forward, moving the needle and staying in line, 1, with the business, and 2, reducing risk and liability for the organization, and saying, I'm working on that. Because like you said, you had 100 tasks, only 10 people. We're always moving. There's always something pivoting. There's always something changing. So that's how I've done it. And I think it's been good, because then you can show a project plan, you can show a strategic tactical operation plan of how you're maturing the environment. And from quarter to quarter, you can say, we've completed this, we've done that. Now we move the needle. So we've got, and I'll just use that example, say it's a new company. We got 2-factor authentication flow. We installed RBAC. We've gotten least privileges. We're now, hardening the administrative controls around privilege accounts. Like we're doing that. We're doing encryption at rest. You can kind of look at how that list progress, and then all the maturity as you build, right, as you keep going through it. And you can kind of see from quarter to quarter. So as well as I do, all the stakeholders, the board, the directors, the management, you can always go, here's what we've accomplished. Here's what we've done in this quarter, and here's what we've done over the year, to show how we're maturing the environment. On top of the steady state ongoing patch management, updating things like that, keeping security, getting alert on logs and things like that, and taking action, threat hunting. On top of that, you're putting these security controls in place, right? And you're maturing them. So I think that's one people that are watching it to think about, because and I agree with you. You're going to have that balance. It's not all security. It's not all business. It's going to be a hybrid of both. But you have to think about in the risk, because you don't want to, and now I don't want to, think about a criticality and push it out. And all of a sudden there's a compromise, and it was in your visibility. Someone told you, someone that, and like the one that reminds me was a Harmony. It was one of the adult dating sites. And they knew for months that they had a vulnerability. They were told by a bounty hunter, like, hey, look, you know what? You had this, right? A program. They were able to tell them, look, you had a vulnerability, and they got compromised, right? I remember like kind of going through that, and that stuck in my mind. And I know it's not eHarmony, it was another one. But I remember that company stuck in my mind going, you at least have to be visible on what's the potential of it. And the higher the potential, the higher the risk that's going to be compromised. That's got to be on your roadmap, and you got to start chipping away at it. Because again, you don't want to be the guy that has to explain that, hey, I knew that in January of 2025. Well, why aren't you doing that? Well, we had a business thing that we were working on. We were deploying, Salesforce. We were doing something else. I was helping with some other things. That should have been high priority, top 10 that was getting worked on remediating.
Yeah. And I'll add to so that top 10, what I like to do too is tier systems, basically the assets that exist. We have a tier 1, a tier 2, tier 3, whatever it happens to be, but each one of them corresponds to a security risk level, right? So tier one are our most critical assets. We want to make sure that they all have this base standard, right? And then as you go through, you can say, okay, tier two, we want to have some stuff, but we don't need as much. And then tier three, we don't care about as much. So if we have that ranking to understand, okay, we're going to drive projects against each of these tiers, and we can show, how well we're doing from a control standpoint across these different tiers of systems. Then we can show that we're actually addressing, we've got a good posture across our, critical, mission critical assets. We've got some work to do on our medium tier, right? For example, and in low tier, it's fine, right? It works fine. We still have base controls that we want on a low, on a low tier vendor, basically a vendor that's not as important. We still want to make sure that they're not exposing our data or because it's still work from a security standpoint if there is a breach, right? So we want to, and there's work from a company standpoint. So we still want to have that understanding of how we're evolving in those. But I fully agree. I think it's, that it's understanding the relationships, understanding what's important, and then finding a way to be able to say, here's the top ones. Because I think it's not just what people are using and what's important to them, but it's also the risks, as you mentioned. It's the risks for those particular platforms and how they feed into that business decision. But again, all of that data is, helping make a business decision on, should we prioritize this or should we not?
Now, I got a question from the community. For setting up a company's plans or policies, what is your go-to documentation? And they have kind of in brackets NIST. Like, do you go to NIST? Do you go to SANS? What's your go-to?
I think they have some value. I think there's plenty of, policy frameworks out there. I personally, a lot of policy frameworks I've seen out there are way too verbose and way too, detailed. And, at the end of the day, I don't want to have every employee read 500 pages of docs to get a better understanding of what their requirements are. Right. So there's got to be a better way. I remember when I was at a company many years back, our security policy was 125 pages, and we expected every employee to read that.
Okay.
And there's no way, nobody read it. Right. We wondered why people didn't know, that this was a policy or that was a policy.
Right.
So I'd say, take any of those frameworks. They all have, some value, but they're, again, just frameworks. So use the parts that make sense to your business. And I think we really need to find a better way to kind of like streamline the way policies are written and the way kind of all those things exist, because we make it too complicated. And that's why we look, people are looking at like security as this black box and this things that they have no idea what's going on over there. It's because we make it so complicated for when people are looking in. So how do we simplify that?
Well, I think it depends on the industry. And I agree with you. Like, if you're not regulated, you're not under compliance, and you don't have to have a very detailed policy of BCPDR, instant response, acceptable use policy. Like, you kind of go through the laundry list of all those policies. You don't really have to have a comprehensive, description, scope, like all that, your shareholders and part of it, like all this information. You've seen them, like they're 25, 30 pages, if not long. You said 100 something pages, right? If you're not there, you take the meat of what you need from these templates, put it over into your style guide of what you need for your policies, create that out, and then start to fill that out. And you should have standardization of your policies, a style guide that you have your policies look and feel the same. They read the same and same structure. Because what happens is it's easier for someone to consume versus one formatted this way, one formatted that way. And I've seen that. I'm sure you have. Is like someone grabbed it from SANS, someone did it from ChatGPT, someone did it from NIST, someone grabbed it from a friend's company. All different formats, all different structures, all different, read differently. And you're like, okay, like who did these? Well, I kind of did some of them, and then another guy did it. When you have uniform policy structure, it's easier to consume, and then structure the policies on how you want each of them written for the company. So then you can have 10, 15, 20, whatever policies that you need. And then it's easier to consume. And then you can start to see, what do I really need in these policies? And there's some to be longer. There might be some that be shorter. Right. Like I've seen like AI policies. Some companies have like a couple pages, 2-3 page AI policy. It's not that deep, very simple to read, very simple to consume, because they don't really do too much with AI. And then if there's questions or concerns, contact the IT department or their manager and be able to escalate that and get an approval and go through that process. Pretty simple. But if you're going through like an acceptable use policy, that might be a little bit deeper. An IT security policy, that might be a little bit deeper. Disaster recovery, business continuity plan might be a little bit deeper, right?
Yep. Yeah, I agree, right? Standardized templates, keep them simple, make sure that it addresses what the needs are of the business. And something that I've been doing, for quite a while too, is, supplementary docs, right?
Right.
So we may need a long policy for compliance reasons, for validating whatever it happens to be. There may be a reason for having that, but you also don't want to put employees through having to read some of those docs, right? So you can some employees may need to read it, but you want to make others aware of it. So you write supplementary docs, FAQs, something along those lines to help employees understand what's in there.
Mhm.
How do we translate basically what is in a policy to the general employee? Because a lot of times they may not understand. And that's what we had, when we had 100 pages basically in our security policy, we had everything in there.
Right.
And probably 75% of it didn't apply to, most employees, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it was the IT and security were a very small percentage of total employees, but most of the policies were directly, targeting those. So it's like, okay, let's separate this out. Let's make sure that we're delivering policies that matter to the end user, and also making sure that the policies are signed off by the right teams, right? The
Mhm.
executive teams, whoever happens to be, because, a policy that you're not adhering to is also not really helpful either, right?
Right.
Because, now you're actually just being negligent. So we want to make sure that the policies, are formatted the same, are easy to read, are, consistent, have the right approvals, et cetera.
No, it makes total sense. Now, last question for me. I know we got about 9 minutes. What should companies be doing for Q4? Like, what should we be thinking about in this last quarter of the year?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, have a better understanding of what you're using in your environment,
Mhm.
including the AI type of tools. I mean, a very big, I don't know about very big, but and a new expanding kind of threat area is, the use of MCPs. You think about just, the model context protocol integrated into your chat system. There's tons of data potentially leaving your environment. So having a better understanding of what people are using, what new tools are being adopted, how they're using it within their workflows. And then something like, I mean, we're working on our 2026 planning right now, and actually we're trying to do a 3-year roadmap, right? And the whole idea is I want to have some directional capability, directional items that say, we're not going to get detailed into like year 2 and year 3 and even the second half of, 2026, but we want to have a vision of where we're going. Right. So that's kind of what we're doing as well. And that's my Q4. But in general, I think, how do you look at what's some of the bigger threats that exist out there? And to me, I see AI as one of those. Yeah, not as a threat, but just like the use of MCPs, the use of the different tools, some of the new skills that came out in Claude that allow you to run, that could have a data exfiltration component. So just having a better understanding would be one of the things I would say more people need to do.
Nice. I mean, some of the things that, and again, for the community is listening, one of the things I recommend is making sure you've completed your vulnerability assessment and remediation, right? A lot of times, this is the sprint, and as well as I do, people are trying to get that pen test at the end of the year, right? It's December, everyone's booking with a pen tester to get that done. But make sure in this Q4, you've remediated, you've done your vulnerability scan, you've done your remediation, you've done your patch management. So when you're going for that pen test, you're in a better position versus some companies I've seen, they go through and they go, oh, I already knew that. I already knew that was a vulnerable. I already knew that was exposed. I already knew that. You want that pen test to kind of go, you've done a great job. We found a few things versus, oh, by the way, I wanted to remind you from your vulnerability scan, all this stuff is still open, right? Oh, great. So you've all actually did a double test, right? And I try to be efficient when people doing that. It's like, okay, make sure you get your patch manager, vulnerability manager underway, at the end of the quarter, because I know most people are going to do the pen test. Next is, like you said, which I totally agree. What's your planning for next year? Like everyone's talking about budgets, everyone's talking about what's our plan. Do a year-end review. What did we, what was our successes? What was our, challenges this year? What did we do really well? And what do we need to learn for next year? Kind of do a recap and then start planning your Q1 2026 goals and what you want to accomplish. Now you're doing a 3-year goal, which is awesome, right? Kind of one of those operation plans, but most companies can only do a lot of tactical because it's just such a moving target. Because they want to have SOC 2 type 2 SIMMC in the next couple of years, but there's so much to do in between that. It's a lot of
That's
work.
why I always say, like, it's those directional statements that say, we want to be, a SOC 2 type 2, right? For example.
Yeah.
Now that's a big thing to, or it can be a big thing, or if you're, a FedRAMP, for example, whatever
Right.
you happen to be, those are big things. So you say, start with the end in mind. Here's what we're working towards, and we're going to, how do we actually get there within that 3-year cycle? So the things I see in like the second half of the year of next year and year 2 and year 3 are very much just directional.
Right.
And then we'll have the tactical items actually go into like the first and second quarter, and then we'll continually evaluate, right? That's another big thing too, is you've got to be continually evaluating what you're doing, what you're working on, if your priorities still align to the company's, to the company priorities. If your list of what's mission critical to this company has changed, there's so many things that, you want to stay on top of. And then on top of the stuff that you just mentioned, right? Your standard kind of, business as usual, pen tests and vulnerability scanning and patching and, whatever else there may be, right? Change management type stuff, making sure you have the right policies and processes in place. So.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's the thing, is that kind of doing that recap review.
Yeah.
Through the year, you know as well as I do, there's gaps, right? I found that, I uncovered this happened, and you made a note of it. And then you're planning out for the 2026. Okay, this is what we want to work on. And the criticality. Policies are never going to be truly critical unless there's an audit, right? I know most people will go through that. I'm sure you have, is that, oh yeah, we're good. Oh, the auditor's coming in next month. And then it's a sprint to go through the policies, a sprint to review everything, make sure everything's up to date. You're going on that while the technical controls are making sure we're in place. We have evidence and screen captures and all that. So I understand, like, there's that. But again, if you're proactive and you're doing that now, it becomes a lot easier when that time comes. If you're ever going through an audit, that you can go, we're up to date. Here you go. Here's the policies. Here's the evidence. Anything else you need? And a lot of times, and I'm sure you've gone through this, where they go, by the way, we need these 5 other things. So now it's 5 things versus 300 they need, right?
Yep. I would say one more thing too for the audience is, in Q4, form that relationship, 1 or 2 relationships with a key stakeholder in the business to get a better understanding. Because I think that's something that we definitely need to do in security, is really understand our businesses, why we're here, why we exist, and what we're helping with, right? Because if we're not doing that, then that's a problem. So I would encourage everyone to, make a friend in the business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's key too. Again, people starting out in security, and I've talked about before, and you mentioned it a few times, is that it's not about technology all the time for security. Like, again, as you come up, you're a SOC analyst, you're doing that, you're doing threat hunting, you're kind of going through, you're doing forensics, you kind of get that, you're doing pen testing. But as you mature, there's now becomes a side of, now you're part of management. You're a director, you're a VP, you're in the C-suite, whatever that may be. And now you have to understand the business, because you're making business decisions regarding security. It's not making security decisions about the business. And a lot of times it's hard for that flip, right? And you matured and you got in there. It's hard to make that flip in the mindset, because you go in a meeting and go, you know what? You need this. You need EDR. I don't understand what we're not doing. You need SIM. Why aren't we having the SIM deploy? And you draw your line in the sand. But as you get older, you realize and mature in the business, you go, okay, what else do we have going on? What's directions the business going? Is there any way we can get this in a more cost-effective way, and we can work together as a team? You start having those conversations, but like versus the security guy coming in is, we need this. If we don't get it, the Russians are going to compromise us. I know, this is happening in the States, and there's protests going on. We're going to get compromised. You guys are not making the decision, and you're going to put it all on me, right? It's like, I get that. And as you mature, you learn that doesn't work.
Yeah, we can't lead with fear. We can't lead with doubt, all the FUD type stuff. That's not the way. And what I've learned too over the years too, and I remember one of my colleagues when I worked at the Realtor family within the News Corp family, he had a really good way of framing it. At the end of the day, security boils down to 2 things. One of them is the psychology side of it, right? How do we actually change the behavior of our employees, right? Because we want them to adopt things, or to share things, or to actually engage with security. And the other side is the economics of it, right? The security. How do we show it in a way that the teams understand the risk about it? Because the technology itself, the tech side of it, it's not super complicated. It's more of how do I convince somebody to actually do this? How do I show them that there's value in doing this, right? So it's changing behavior, and it's showing how it actually affects risk, bottom line, money, et cetera, right? Because the tech side of it, that we continue doing that, but we can't lead with the tech, because that only gets us so far. The tech is there to solve a business problem.
100%. Now, coming up to the end, best way to get a hold of you is through LinkedIn?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So if anyone wants to reach out to Joshua, has any questions, reach out. Here's his LinkedIn. I'll leave it on the screen for a second. Any last comments?
No, I mean, this has been great. I'm 30 years in the business. I still love security. So, I've heard plenty of people talk about, getting burned out. And, I think security people are you have a lifelong desire to continue learning and keep on, and the uncertainty and all that, the chaos, to me, I enjoy it, Right. So if you like those kind of things, this is a great field to be in. And it's, it can be very fun and very rewarding. And I couldn't see myself doing anything different.
Now the company's Hydrolix, is that
Hydrolix?
Hydrolix. Okay.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to mess that, but okay. Hydrolix.
Yep.
Here's the URL, https hydrolix.io. Guys, check it out. Guys have any questions? Again, I left, you guys have his LinkedIn account. Check it out. Thank you so much, Joshua. This was great. Always great to learn so much from an expert like yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brandon. It was awesome. Enjoyed it.
Give me a second here. All right, guys, that was a great session. I hope you guys took some notes, learned a lot from this. Again, talking to a VP of security with, 20 plus, I think 30 years experience, I think you said. Again, the wealth of knowledge as he came up in the 90s and came up to now where he's at now, just to learn how he's evolved, how he's developed, the different types of solutions, technology, the challenge that he's dealing with, and still kind of understands and is adapting, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is, as you mature in this industry, you not only learn about the technology, like you saw, about the business, right? And you work with the colleagues you have, like your business, your shareholders, your partners, right? To really evolve and grow. And I think one thing I recommend too, like he was recommending, connect with your partners, connect with your outside vendors and partners, connect with your internal team, really develop those relationships because you're going to learn so much and they're going to teach you and keep you engaged with what's going on in the network, what's going on in the industry, what's happening. So then you can keep abreast of like, what do I need to know? What do I need to focus on? So a lot of great information. I think, going away from this myself, there's some checklists that I have that I want to go through. And I just want to, make sure 2024, I'm ready for 2025, I'm ready for 2026. So this was a great session. I hope you guys learned a lot. So don't forget, software is hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.